The pattern we're tying up today is the Zug Bug. It's a good streamer nymph pattern, as old as time probably. I've got a size 16 fulling mill nymph hook here in my vise, and I'm just using some 14-aught black sheer thread, and you are going to want to use the black thread because the Zug Bug has a very pronounced, fairly large head when you finish off. And so it's pretty forgiving. It's a good fly if you're just starting out. But I'm going to go ahead and take this thread back here, and I try to wax my thread just so it helps grip some of these materials at the very beginning, because we're going to tie in quite a few, well, 3 materials at the very start that are going to be used to build our abdomen. We'll start out by tying in a tail, and with the tail we're just going to go with some peacock sword. You'll just take 3 pieces from your peacock, and this is going to be a pretty stubby tail, so I'm going to want this maybe half the length of the shank of the hook, so I'm going to kind of measure it there. We'll get a wrap in and just kind of see where we are, and we can make an adjustment if we need to, but I really don't want to get too many wraps in here. That's why I like my thread waxed on this particular pattern. And that's going to do me just fine. So we'll immediately turn to our ribbing material. For ribbing, I'm just using a medium-size silver oval tinsel. So I'm going to get that attached back here with just 1 thread wrap. That should hold it in place. And then we're going to turn to our final material. I'm going to use 3 peacock herls in this particular case. I've got 3 of them already selected. I'm going to just clip off the tip ends here because they tend to be a little bit more delicate there at the tip. And once I've got those in, I'm going to tie this in by the tip, and I'm not going to fight it. I'm just going to go ahead and take 1 wrap to get that in place. And once I have that in place, I'll just draw those fibers back so we have enough length to travel down the length of the shaft of the hook here. And from there, we should be good to start working our way forward up towards the eye of the hook. And I'll leave most of these materials in place. They'll just help us a little bit with bulk. We don't need much of a bulk, and this is not going to be one of those patterns that has a taper to it either. So as we start winding our peacock up towards the eye of the hook, you'll see that we don't do a lot of over-the-top wraps. But I do have a little bit more length than I want, so I'm going to go ahead and come in here with my scissors, just so I make sure I'm not tying over the top of the eye of the hook. Because that tinsel has metal in it, my advice to you would be to take a pair of scissors that you've had for a really long time and set them aside, and use those as the scissors you're going to use for tying or for cutting off wire or tinsel like that, because it has a tendency to really dull the blades of your scissors. So with our abdomen material now in place, I'm going to grab those 3 peacock herl, and I like to grab them by the ends that were closest to the stalk. Make sure that they're tight. Don't pull too hard or they'll break. And I just like to kind of rotate them in my fingers to create a little bit of a rope, and it just helps keep those herls from separating on you. And then we're going to take this first wrap right around the back end of the hook. I always want to make sure I get 1 good wrap back there, and then I'm pretty much just going to proceed up the shank of the hook, taking fairly touching turns. Again, not concerned about building up a taper or anything here. So really all I'm trying to do is create this nice peacock herl abdomen as we move our way up towards the eye of the hook. Once I get about right here, I'm just going to go ahead and stop, and we'll just go ahead and release our bobbin from the cradle and tighten that thread up, and we'll just take a thread wrap or 2 to secure those in place. If you don't keep the tension on those, they're just going to come unwound on you. But really, after you get a wrap or 2, it's not going to go anywhere. that taken care of, I'm just going to come on in here with my scissors and we'll just cut off those butt ends. And once we have those butt ends cut off, I'm now going to grab my silver oval tinsel here. Make sure that my tails are still sticking out. I like to try to get one wrap of this right around the back end, trying to not have it interfere too much with those tails. And from there we're going to take very open wraps. On a size 16 like this, I'm thinking maybe 4 wraps, 5 at the most. So we're going to take those wraps up to where we ended with. Here's a hint: don't let go of your tinsel. By the way, it's not the end of the world if you do, because it's pretty easy to rescue yourself. I'm going to go ahead and keep that going, and that's about where I want it to be. With that, I'm just going to take my thread once again, throw it over the top of this tinsel, locking it in place, and then I'll just take a couple of thread wraps on the other side. I'll grab that pair of scissors. I don't want to say that they're bad scissors. They're not. They're actually really good scissors, but I've had them for a really long time, and so they're very dull. So I can go ahead and clip the rest of that off, and we'll be sitting with our Zug Bug right about there. So this pattern is going to have a little bit of a soft hackle, so I've just kind of grabbed a hen hackle that is going to be like tied in like a soft hackle. And I want these longer fibers down here, so I'm actually going to kind of stroke those fibers back as evenly as I possibly can. It doesn't hurt to wet your fingers when you're doing that. I'm going to wet my fingers also to get the front end here. So once I have that feather pretty much prepared, and this is the tip, I'm going to go ahead and cut a little triangle out just by cutting that tip off, and you can see we have just a tiny little triangle there, and that's going to be our tie-in point. Just helps us secure this material to our hook. I'm going to go ahead and just get that secured about where I want my soft hackle to start. Once I get that first wrap in, I can kind of stroke some of those fibers backwards as I take a few wraps moving up towards the eye of the hook, just to secure that hackle in place. And if it looks like it's going to be a little bit long, just grab your scissors. We're not in any kind of a race here. We're just working on tying a fly. So I'm not really looking at creating a really thick soft hackle here. I'm going to grab my hackle pliers and get it attached right to the center of that stem. And once I've got that in place like that, I'm going to just kind of stand it up. And just like any soft hackle, I'm going to wet my fingers pretty good and work on stroking those fibers backwards. And once you've got them aimed backwards, I'm going to just take a wrap, and some of them are going to poke out. That's fine. We can clean those up in a second. But each time I come to the top, I'm going to go ahead and do that once again. I'm going to work on stroking as many of these fibers back as I possibly can before I start with my next wrap. I'll probably just take one more wrap here. It's about like that. That's going to do me just good. And we will be able to fold those fibers back in soft hackle kind of fashion, so I'm not too worried about those fibers that are sticking out over the eye. So let's go ahead we'll just take a turn or two of our thread here just to lock that hackle in place. Take a turn or two on the other side of it as well. And with that, we should be able to come on in with our scissors and cut off the right at the stem, right where the stem is tied in, is exactly where we want that to be. So what I do here is just kind of wet my fingers and stroke those fibers back, and we can go wrap back over the top of them a little bit, and that will just help keep those in a backwards trajectory like that. And I also like this to kind of be more like a beard, so I'm going to actually stroke some of those fibers so they're predominantly underneath. They all won't be, but I do like to get most of those that I can to go underneath, kind of in that hook gap area. And if you take your time, you may end up with some strays like I just did, but that's okay. We can, if you don't want to cooperate, I have a very effective way of addressing that. But hopefully you can see now we've got that nice soft hackle that's primarily down here at the bottom. We're going to just finish this off with a wing case, and I'm just going to use some Mallard flank. In this case, I'm just going to use olive. I've already prepared by stripping off all of the fluffy bits at the end, so it's looking a little bit like that. I'm going to give this a couple of strokes just to straighten out those fibers a little bit. And what's helpful is to just go ahead and come in and clip this straight off. Just about like that. So it's kind of already now pre-made to be that wing case. We'll sit that on the top. I don't need it to be overly long. I'm going to kind of pinch it to hold it in place. We'll take a wrap or two fairly carefully just to try to keep that on the top of the shank of the hook here. And then we'll take kind of a look at it, and that's what you should be seeing, is a nice little wing case just about like that. From there, I'm going to go ahead and peel that stem back, take a couple of wraps behind the eye of the hook, and then I'm going to come in and clip this off as close as I can. And from there, we're going to just work on building that little bit of a pronounced head. I like to start out right behind the eye of the hook and then start working my way back up a little bit, just so we're covering up as much as we can those butt ends that we just cut off on that Mallard flank. Again, this has a pronounced head, so this is what's supposed to happen. It is supposed to get a little bit beefy like this, and so I'm just going to go ahead and take those wraps back to where my wing case is. Go ahead and give myself a little bit of extra thread while I grab my whip finisher, and we'll do a couple of whip finishes, primarily back here towards the back. Release that from our whip finisher right there. Grab our thread cutter. With that, we are done with the pattern. So the Zug Bug, this is a great nymph streamer pattern, been around forever, fun and kind of easy to tie. Throw yourself a hook in the vise and give this one a shot.